should we use the bulking and cutting construction? Daniel, you've been in the calisthenics scene for over 10 years, and I think you've also, you've been bigger, you've been smaller, you've seen it all. You've seen all different kind of body weights, and I'm sure you've probably done a cutting, a bulking phase. And I wonder, what are your thoughts?
When I first started, when I was 17, calisthenics, I was around 6 foot, as I still am now. That's 183 centimeters and 74 kilos. So very, very light. And I have that as a basis for when I first started doing things like muscle ups, front levers, planches, and the progress that I was making at that weight. It seemed as if my progress was quicker when I was lighter and leaner compared to the opposite when several years into my training, I started getting into more of the high volume, weighted calisthenics type of stuff. And I got up to 93 kilos. So 74 to 93. And, still grinding hard on all the calisthenics movements, trying to get my straddle planche at those stats and just being really frustrated because I had this extra body weight that I was dealing with, a lot of cumulative fatigue from all the training that I was doing. It wasn't as if I was just going for those strength skills. I was doing things like leg day, with squats, deadlifts, lunges. That adds non-functional mass to the lower extremity, which we know makes leverage-based skills in calisthenics more difficult. So I just put that in the mix there as my little excuse for not getting calisthenics gains super, super quickly. But it is a objective reality associated with that. And for me, despite being in that position of heavier body weight, more muscle mass, I really felt as if my progress was plateauing to its full potential. What I mean is, in order for me to get towards that straddle planche or 5-second goal that I had and unlock those 5 one-arm chin-ups, unless I made my training highly specific, as in I'm only doing planche and maybe only working on the one-arm chin, I don't think I would have ever got there at that body weight, just because, as I said, too much training, too much fatigue, too much body weight just makes it really, really difficult. My first success, I could say, with having the highlight reel of good achievements in calisthenics came when I cut down to my current body weight, which we can talk about this. There's usually a set point most people have when they're training for a few years and they're getting more advanced. Cut down from 93 kilos to 84 kilos, and night and day difference. This body weight ratio with my relative strength just seemed to be optimized for me. It wasn't too hard to maintain this nutritional state in terms of, not having to do excessive cardio or count calories excessively. It's just with a bit of concerted effort on just healthy habits, decent food, not eating like an absolute idiot, type of things we get into, just like sweets and treats at night after you've had a hard day at school and whatnot. We're talking about calisthenics, bodyweight stuff, relative strength, pound for pound, how you can move your body in space, hold it, defy gravity, etc. Being lighter and leaner is really key in calisthenics. And an approach that I often recommend is that beginners do spend a bit of time just on a surplus so that they've in an energy positive state to build some muscle tissue. Nothing excessive like an elite bodybuilder, but enough in the requisite muscle groups in your upper body so that you've got essentially the hardware of your body, the muscle mass, that you can teach the software, your nervous system, with exercise.
Yeah, I love how you put that. The hardware is what people who just started on calisthenics should work on in the first few years, or maybe even in the first year, I would say, because most of them can get so many gains that they could often already transition to work more on the software. One of the things that I hear from your story and that I've always asked myself is, hey, have I not spent too much time bulking? Should I have not spent that time doing more specific work? And thinking more and more back, after just looking back at my 14-year career of doing calisthenics, I feel like a bulking phase after a year of training is probably a waste of time if your end goal is planche or front lever or one arm pull-ups, these type of movements where there's no added weight, where the main focus is just the body weight leverage based movements, where you just make it harder by either doing a unilateral version or just a more leverage based movement. And the reason why I say that is when you're doing a bulking phase, you are gaining weight, right? And you're also now spending time on hypertrophy work that you can't spend on strength work or skill work, at least not in an efficient way. Now you also are put in a position that you need to do a cutting cycle because you're too heavy. Like you mentioned, you're done 93 kilos. So that's not the ideal way to do the straddle planche or the full planche or whatever you're doing. So now you need to spend a couple of months on the cutting phase. And so now you've lost that weight, and now you can start working on your, planches, etc., in a more efficient way. That's a lot of time. That's often a span of like 3 to 9 months. A lot of time. And so I looked a little bit in the literature, and a few studies came out. I think a study in 2023 in January came out where by Eric Helms, who's a respected person in the fitness industry. He's a natural bodybuilder, a well-known researcher. He has a PhD in strength and conditioning, and he did a study on different surpluses on trained groups. So they looked at trained lifters for over 8 weeks. They had 3 groups. They had a maintenance group, they had a 5% surplus group, and a 15% surplus group. And they looked at the 1RM strength, they measured the muscle thickness, and they did skin folds. And what they found is that all groups gained muscle regardless of whether they were in a caloric surplus, or at least they were in maintenance, or in the 15. The only difference in mass gain was fat tissue. The 15% surplus just gained more fat tissue versus the 5% or the maintenance. But they all gained muscle. And they found that the biceps grew the most. And the reason for that is they treated the bicep differently than the other muscle groups. So the biceps had a lot more volume. And they were training them more closer to failure. And that muscle just grew more. Kind of pointing back to what I said before, that all the literature points to volume work is just the key to growing. But the interesting thing is there's evidence now that you don't need to do such a big surplus that you gain fat. You can do something what often by bros is called gaintaining. And this is done on trained athletes. And obviously, trained athletes is not like, I think I even looked up how trained they were. I think the inclusion was they could at least bench press their own body weight, and they could at least do 1.5 times their body weight for men. And for women, it was 0.75 body weight and squats of 1.25 body weight. So it's not super trained, but they're trained. This could be your athlete after 3 to 9 months of training, or maybe a year, depending on where you start from. And so this study. And there were obviously studies beforehand, but this study kind of caught me at the right moment. I was like, wait a second. Jesus, this is another argument for why I shouldn't do these huge caloric surpluses where I gain all this fat tissue, and then I need to lose it. I could do gaintaining. And I look back at like professional calisthenics athletes that don't overcomplicate it like I do, with the cutting and the bulking, where they kind of follow this gaintaining, and they're growing, but they're growing very slow, and they're relatively lean all year round, but they're gaining, they're becoming bigger. And I thought to myself, well, this is a much more superior way of training. What if you just do a few hypertrophy cycles, like you do 1 or 2 hypertrophy cycles where you're focused on volume, and you make it quite specific to the movements that you're training. So let's say you are training for full planche push-ups, then you do some dips in leaning forward, so kind of chest dips, and you get really strong at that. And then at the same time, just do volume training, so you're building a little bit specific strength, but also primarily focusing on the volume. Now you're bigger, you don't need to do a cutting cycle, you can immediately go into the skill cycle. You start doing the skill cycle. I make quite some gains, do another skill cycle, make gains, I'm plateauing a little bit, I kind of need more muscle. You go back to the hypertrophy cycle. Whoa, how efficient.
I'm glad you mentioned that point, because it's so easy for us when discussing something such as bulking, cutting, maintaining, for it to be just one or the other. And we just default to an easy assumption of I'm bulking excessively. You're going like big boy Danny mode up to 93 kilos. Reflecting back, it's way too much. It's excessive. Most of that would have been fat gain. Like if I just went from that 74 as a beginner to maybe up to like 3 or 4 kilos more,
Exactly.
Most, maybe 5, that's plenty, because then 1, you're not having as much fat tissue, and 2, you've got less overall body weight, so you're not stressing your body as much during your calisthenics movements. We know that the tendons, ligaments, connective tissues are just precious. When I was at 94 kilos, man, my body was taking an absolute beating trying to do those movements.
Yeah, and that's another great point. Going to such a body weight can have impact on your connective tissue fatigue, your joint fatigue, and can have impact on just the integrity. So is it even safe to do that? That's another argument you can bring up. But for me, this was a kind of an eye-opening. Like a lot of people in the audience might think, well, yeah, duh, duh. But the thing is, there's not a lot of studies done on this. So you're going to look at other sports where there is success. The best of the best do the bulking phases and the cutting phases.
Yeah, and I'll just add another bit about the maintaining type of situation where you're within, a very, very mild calorie surplus or just at a net neutral. If you want to build some more muscle mass, then if you do some targeted work, then there's potential to grow muscles that haven't received that full stimulus. I know there's a lot of people in calisthenics that only do the compounds. And if they've never done any isolation on a lateral raise, biceps, triceps, if you're in that Maingaining phase and you progressively overload those isolation movements, there is definitely room for growth, because you're like a beginner in a respect in terms of that stimulus to those tissues.
Right, and there could be I don't have enough study to prove this, but there could be an argument that all the protein synthesis in that small margin that you're giving could go to the muscles that, if you're not training too many muscles at the same time, maybe there's more resources going to that. I don't know if I can back this up, but that could be going on. That could be very interesting, and you could find out your weak points, muscles that are definitely lacking. And how do you know which ones are lacking? I mean, just look at the strongest athletes, and you'll find that they have a lot in common. The strongest athletes within calisthenics have a few things in common. They have extremely big delts, extremely big biceps, big triceps, decent pecs. If you look at the Victorian kings, they have crazy rear delts. So you can look at these athletes and be like, oh, where am I lacking? You can compare. Okay, you know what? I'm going to do some rear delt, pec flies or whatever. It's like stuff like these things you could implement and, like you're saying, do some isolation work and start just banging out those reps, volume, and get bigger, and then start doing, again, specific work, skill work, and get stronger in your Victorian if you're training for that. Great point.
100%. Yeah. And just some practical advice for people. It's so simple, but I never see anyone doing this. In your workout program, you're writing down your exercise, your sets, your reps, your hold times, all these important parameters. Write down your body weight. We're doing calisthenics. You wouldn't go into the gym and be like, I'm doing bench press. How much am I lifting? I don't know. There's like 1.5 plates. I don't know how big they are. Whereas with calisthenics, it's like if you have a 74 kilo Daniel doing a tuck planche versus a 94 kilo Daniel doing a tuck planche, similar joint angles, whatnot, you can more accurately measure the intensity if you've progressed, because that is a variable in your training. Very important.
That's a very good point. It brings me to the point where I've spoken to so many athletes where that half a kilo or a kilo in weight apparently makes a huge difference. And if you think back, you're like, if you look at the theory, like, but how does that make sense? Like, why would a half a kilo, if I would do a front lever now and you would add half a kilo somewhere on my body, like let's say at the hip, so it's like evenly spread, I wouldn't feel that. I literally wouldn't feel that. I would probably maybe have like a 1 second decrease in hold, but yet time by time, everyone mentions the same thing. Yo, I lost half a kilo or a kilo and I'm 10 times stronger now.
I'm sure it matters, but depending on the amount of weight is a factor too. If it's like you weigh 100 grams different, you're like, bro, can't perform today, can't do it.
Yeah,
it's the 100 grams.
Excessive.
That's probably too much.
That's probably a little bit too much. Everyone knows their weight. Eventually, like after you've trained for 3 to 5 years, you know, that's the weight I need to go back to. That's the weight where I started killing things. And that weight might increase very slowly. We're talking about maybe adding half a kilo to a year, like a kilo like every year. And maybe once you're like in 10 years, it'll even be a few grams, you know, because you're gaining muscle mass.
If you're still here and you want to keep learning and master calisthenics, click here to watch another video. Thanks, guys.